Ambassador Alberto Fernandez is a veteran of speaking at Westminster Institute and an old friend of long standing. Alberto's State Department career, or I should say, before that, United States Information Agency career, was in public diplomacy. He also served at the ambassadorial level, but for anybody who viewed Arabic media in 2003 and well afterwards, the voice of the State Department and the Bush administration on Al Arabiya and Al Jazeera was Ambassador Fernandez. He was the one explaining U.S. policy. He was the one engaging in debates, which he did so capably in representing our country. I forget how long I've known you, but I know we were in Kuwait together in 2003, but I've admired Alberto for many years. And after retiring from the State Department, Alberto became the vice president of the Middle East Media Research Institute, or MEMRI, where his writings on problems in the Islamic world were brilliant. As I mentioned once here before, occasionally the United States government makes a mistake and puts the right person in the right job. And I've never seen that to be more true than the case of Ambassador Fernandez being appointed the president of the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, MBN, which are U.S. government-supported voices to the Arab Middle East. That includes Al-Hurra, Iraq, and Radio Sawa, as well as the social media, and some 25 million unduplicated weekly viewers or listeners. This is a facility of the United States government with which I was familiar since Sawa came out of the VOA Arabic service back in 2003. VOA veterans here who remember that. And for many years, it was a squandered opportunity. So it's extremely satisfying to see someone of Alberto's qualifications, intelligence, and understanding running the U.S. government network. Now, I haven't read any of the bio, but you can detect my enthusiasm for our speaker tonight. He came from Cuba as a refugee, 1959. He served in the U.S. Army and has had his distinguished State Department career as well as this second career. So I'll, without further ado, leave it to Alberto to discuss reinventing an American international broadcasting network to the Arab world.
Thank you, Bob. It's always a real pleasure to be back at the Westminster Institute. I've enjoyed it in the past, and like the past, I think the most valuable thing here is always the free exchange of ideas and criticism and opinion. And I especially look forward to that. I'm going to try to go quickly through my remarks so there's ample time for Q's and A's and complaints and whatever people want to bring up. When Bob asked me to speak here, he asked me to do that some months ago. And I said, I can't do it. It's too early. I think you asked me 6 months ago or something, or 7 months ago. I said, it's too early. It's still too early. We are deep in MBN in a process of transformation, which is beginning. I've been at the head of the network for almost 11 months. But I feel that a lot of what we've done are baby steps. We can go into why and all of that, but I really feel that we're at the beginning of a process of transformation. We're not anywhere near as much as we're going to be in it. After I retired after 32 years in the State Department in 2015, one of the vows I made was to never have anything to do with the U.S. government ever again. And memory was great. Memory has a special place in my heart. I could write what I want. Igal was very generous in allowing me to write and say what I want, and which I really appreciated. All those years of writing for the U.S. government where nobody saw what you wrote, now you actually had to write things which people actually could read. And so I was very happy there. And then out of the blue, I was asked to take over MBN last year. And it presented me with a very interesting dilemma because I had a long history with MBN. Not working for MBN, of course, but I was one of the people that had been consulted. Many people had been consulted early on in 2002, 2001, 2002, when the Bush administration set up SAWA and then Al-Hura. And in fact, as public affairs officer in Amman, Jordan, we were the first post in the Arab world to get Radio SAWA on the air in 2002. The first agreement that was signed to broadcast Radio SAWA was in Jordan and was done during my tenure in Jordan. And after that, when I was head of public diplomacy for Iraq and head of public diplomacy for the NEA Bureau and State, I had my experiences with Al-Hurra and MBN, many of them bad, many of them negative. I remember, and I'm being blunt here, I remember being in my office and having it on in my office in, I think, 2006 or 2007, and I see Hassan Nasrallah, the head of the terrorist group Hezbollah, speaking on Al-Hurra, and I say, oh, he's going to speak for a few minutes. And he speaks, and he speaks, and he speaks, and he speaks. They had him on for an hour, and I'm emailing my boss at NEA, what is going on? This is actually a notorious incident that you can read about, and that people were fired and things, unpleasant things happened. And so I've had a long history of criticizing the work of MBN, criticizing Al-Hurra, mocking it in a certain way of this is not very good, this is not very impressive. And so I was presented in 2017 with an interesting intellectual and moral challenge, which is I, who have been a critic about this operation, I, who have dismissed this operation with contempt, can I put my mouth where my, whatever money my mouth is? How can I respond? What do I do? Do I remain a critic? Do I remain a person that is dismissive? Or do I roll up my sleeves and try to fix it? I told the people at the Broadcasting Board of Governors that if they chose me, I intended to change things. That I was not coming in to run things the way they were. That I was coming in to be actually a force for change, and there needed to be a lot of change at MBN. So I didn't come in with any kind of guarantee that I was going to maintain anything. And I know there are a few people here that actually work for me or have a connection with Al-Hurra, and they can tell you that with MBN that I think I was pretty clear in my first town hall meeting about the same thing. I told them, I said, some very harsh things. I mean, I tried to be nice, but, I said some difficult things that sometimes have to be said, like, this is not a government job. You're not guaranteed a job. You don't have tenure here. We need to focus on results. We need a better product. We have been, in a way, a marginal force in the region in many ways. Even our successes haven't been the successes that we really need for the sake of the taxpayer. And so I took this on in 2017 and with a kind of a change agenda, which I'm implementing now. And I'm going to describe it in some detail to you, but I'm going to start with a kind of admission of guilt or admission of humility, which is what I am doing is something which I think makes sense and is logical. It can be logically defended. I think it has roots in a kind of I think, nuanced view of the region and the challenges of the region. However, my experience in the region, I have no idea whatsoever, no guarantee in my mind whether at the end of the day all the changes that we're making, the change in focus, the kind of change in content, the change in kind of an ideological worldview we're making, whether at the end of the day it's going to appeal to a mass Arab audience or not. What I would love to say to you is the changes we're making is going to make us a competitor to Al Jazeera, a competitor to Al Arabiya. That's my goal. I have no idea whether we're going to be in that horse race or whether we're going to be also Reds. But I do know this. It was, if I'd been offered this position in earlier years, I probably would have said no. But 2017 is a really interesting period in, I think, Arab broadcast media and kind of media operations in the region because of what's been going on in the region. You have certain things which have happened. We're kind of living in 2017 and now a kind of unique period in pan-Arab broadcast media. You had the phenomenon which is known as the Arab Spring, this great flowering of God knows what. People didn't know exactly what it was going to be, and great hope and also great dashed hopes of kind of a democratic flowering in the region. There was a kind of reaction to it that you see, kind of Thermidorian reaction to the revolution of the Arab Spring, which has resulted in a kind of Indian summer of regimes. So you have kind of regimes are back. The regimes are back. The red lines are back. The Arab media space today in the region is more, instead of being more free, is less free because of the Arab Spring. There are more red lines rather than less red lines. There is more of an attempt at control, often failing because of basically the way technology and media has changed, but the desire for control is very high. And so as a result of that, what you see is a kind of loss of prestige and loss of credibility of some of these outlets that have existed for a long time. On top of that, you have, for example, the phenomenon, which of course we just had the first anniversary of it, of the Qatar, anti-Qatar coalition fighting it out in Arab media and non-Arab media, which is also deeply degraded the credibility and the appeal of traditional pan-Arab media. Today it's fascinating. If you look at the big dogs, Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, Sky News, those are 1, 2, 3, you have this bizarre reality that is occurring, which is an obsession with the other, where they talk about is how bad, if you watch Al Jazeera focuses on anything bad that they can find about their enemies. So number one, it's about talking smack about the Saudis and the Emiratis. Number one, that's it. Number two, talking smack about the friends of the Saudis and the Emiratis. So the Egyptians and the Bahrainis and whatever, and kind of highlighting their friends. So for example, Al Jazeera will go crazy about any journalist that is arrested by Saudis, Emiratis, Egyptians, and be completely silent about any journalist arrested by, example, Turkey, because they are like this with the Erdogan regime. So what you have, and the others in reverse. So what you have is this kind of extreme polarization, which has led, interestingly enough, to a lack of credibility, a kind of tiresome one-note programming by the leaders in the Arab media space. That has led to the creation of a vacuum. There is an opportunity for something new, something different in the pan-Arab media space. So it's a perfect time, actually, to try to reinvent U.S. broadcasting in Arabic, given this kind of mutually assured destruction that is happening between the forces of the pro-Qatar and anti-Qatar forces in that space. It's almost as if they are broadcasting, instead of, broadcasting, it's actually as if the big three are narrowcasting. as if Al Jazeera is broadcasting to the leadership of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. You, Prince so-and-so, are no good. You're blah, 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 blah. And the other way around. Instead of talking in the language of the masses, instead of kind of having a language which is broadly appealing, it's actually become much more narrowly focused. And something which I've criticized Al Jazeera many times, it's become more boring than it ever was before. Al Jazeera was many things, but it was often not boring. It's become a lot duller than it used to be because of this obsession. And again, both sides have much more red lines, much more taboo issues, much less flexibility than they had a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago. So there's a real opportunity for us. And there's also, in addition to that, there are real demographic and viewing changes that are occurring in the region. Dissatisfied masses that find that the usual discourse in pan-Arab media, which is heavily skewed towards politics, towards Arab politics and Western politics, the evil West, is, while satisfying at a certain level, there's a huge demand, a huge thirst in the region for questions and content that focus about the real concerns that really have. If you look at Arab media surveys that have been done or youth surveys that have been done, the Arab masses, especially youth audiences, do they have positions on Palestine? Do they have positions about the United States and all of that? Yes, absolutely. The biggest concerns are things about employment and their economic future, their social background, corruption. Am I going to have housing? Am I going to have a decent job? Those types of things are actually by far more important to Arab masses, especially youth audience, than a lot of the stuff that they usually hear about, which is the bloody shirt, the Qamis Uthman that we say in Arabic, of whatever the latest political, tempest in a teapot that is happening that the Pan-Arabs are highlighting. So, tremendous opportunity. When I took over at MBN, for me, I thought, well, what is the problem? The problem is has multiple, is hydra-headed. But the first problem, the basic problem for me, is that this is a network, especially Al Hurra Television, and nobody knows MBN in the Arab world. People know Al Hurra Television or Radio Sawa. The corporate name is not known. We call it Middle East Broadcasting Networks, but nobody knows that in the region. The basic problem for me is this is a network that had no clear identity. Or if it had a clear identity, it was one reduced to a kind of a cliched view that this is a mouthpiece of the US government. That if you ask people, that's what they would say MBN's products are. But it's more than that. They would say this is a boring mouthpiece of the US government. This is a vanilla mouthpiece of the US government. This is an uninteresting and outdated and not pleasant to look at mouthpiece of the US government. This is a mouthpiece of the US government whose visual impact looks like 1980s local television in the United States. Kind of flat, SD, standard definition, dated studios, old people, talking about things that were news 12 hours ago or 24 hours ago, rather than the latest thing happening. So we have an identity problem. We also have, obviously, a brand, a marketing problem as well. But for me, the way I saw it is you need to fix the content before you can market. You can't market garbage, right? You have to kind of have something which is better than what you're producing to market. For me, it kind of seemed that what we produced fell between two stools. It was not enough newsy for a news channel to compete with the other news channels, like the Al Jazeeras and the Al Arabiyas, and not good enough in the non-news to compete with the non-news channels. So in other words, not like Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, and not Nat Geo or Discovery, which, by the way, you can get in Arabic in the region. So you basically have a kind of muddled middle. That's a problem. The technical quality, as I said, was poor. So we've had to work on both tracks. the track of broadcast quality and the track of content and focus. On broadcast quality, the challenge I set for the staff, which we're still working on, is we need to, and this is maybe will be shocking to you, we need to have the broadcast quality of RT Arabic. We don't have the broadcast quality today of RT Arabic. RT Arabic has much better broadcast quality than we do, which just tells you something. That the Russians, with all of their financial problems and whatever, I mean, obviously RT is an important operation for them, that aesthetically, visually, it has a better picture than we do. It has a kind of a better look than we do, is something that we have to fix. So on broadcast quality, we're trying to match, and we're changing everything. I mean, we're trying to make the high definition experience be one that is consistent throughout, so that everything that you will see will be high definition. New sets, new studios, new graphics. We need to be ubiquitous in our presence. There are large swaths, for example, in the Middle East where we're not seen. I'll give you an example. I was shocked right before I started. I was in Beirut. I was in a hotel, and in my hotel, I turned on the television set. They didn't have Al Hurra television. No big deal, right? It's just my hotel. So I was idly talking to a gentleman at this conference that I was. He didn't know I was coming to take over here at MBN. And I said, yeah, I was watching. I noticed that they don't have Al Hurra on this hotel, the Hotel Bustan that I was staying in. He said, oh, well, you can't get Al Hurra in Lebanon. I said, what? I said, well, because in Lebanon, most people get television on cable TV, and Al Hurra is not on cable. So in addition to having a better aesthetic, a better look, we need to actually be where, it's the Willie Sutton School of Broadcast Journalism, right? Willie Sutton, the famous bank robber, when he was asked, why do you rob banks, Mr. Sutton? He said, because that's where the money is, right? Well, you need to go where the audience is. If the audience in Lebanon is on cable TV, you need to be on cable TV in Lebanon, or Palestine, or Israel, or Dubai, or wherever it is. You need to be also on platforms less traditional platforms where you have young people that are actually watching television, not in front of a television set, but they're watching it on your phone. So you have to have material which is suitable for people to watch on their phone. So that's what we're doing in the technical sense. In the content sense, we're again trying to change the kind of muddled middle, or the lack of definition, or the lack of focus, and highlight a kind of a much more specific and distinctive process. In my view, and I think the view of people that I've consulted in, I mean, the future of media, and I think many of us see that, and what do we watch, what do we look at online, is people don't sit and consume media the way they used to. People look for things which are distinctive. People look for things that are unique. People look at things, for things that have a bite and have a voice. The idea of kind of, Walter Cronkite and kind of middle America, that is all gone. Some of you may not know who Walter Cronkite was. It's more going to be people that are doing opinion journalism, people that are doing short form or long form journalism that is quirky or edgy or outrageous or extremely right, extremely left, whatever it is. It's going to be something that's going to be interesting, that's going to appeal to you. So we have to search, we have to kind of find our identity within, first of all, embracing the American dimension, but not the American dimension of the cliched Arab audience's view of us, which is Al Hurra is a mouthpiece of the US government. But know that our American identity is we represent this amazing country, which is diverse and dynamic and open and freer than anything that anyone in the Arab world could dream of. And we need to communicate that dynamism and that freedom and that diversity of American society, culture, government, etc., in a way which is compelling. So we have to embrace the American identity. Instead of we can't run from it, we have to embrace it. And secondly, I have believed, and as Bob mentioned, as a public diplomacy officer, I've always believed, and not just because I was a public diplomacy officer, I believe in the war of ideas. I believe in standing for something and having a specific worldview. And so I believe that what we have to have as our identity is Number one, obviously a very enhanced American identity, but also an identity which unabashedly and aggressively demonstrates support for classic liberal and universal values. I began early on with the easiest thing, and I began in August 2017 to launch our first op-ed page. Because we had, one of the things we didn't have, there are no opinions that we had. It was, again, on the one hand, on the other hand, you know, on the other one hand, Mr. Saddam Hussein, what do you think? You know? On the other hand, Mr. Zawahiri, what do you think? No. We have to stand for something. And so I began our online op-ed page called Min Zawiya Ukhra, from another corner, from another perspective, with getting columnists. And I got columnists, some of them were people I knew or people that I liked. And it's grown to, I think, a very lively, I think emblematic of what I want the whole thing to be. We have about 25 columnists, 30 columnists, but they tend to overwhelmingly be, I mean, there's a wide diversity of views, but they do tend to be liberal, reformists, free thinkers with a high level of autonomy and freedom. And we see them discussing all kinds of edgy and forbidden topics in these columns, from politics to religion to social issues, with greater freedom that exists in other large digital spaces in the region. They basically criticize everything, and they have. I mean, you know, you can find criticism of our president. You can find criticism of our allies in the region. Now, that's not only what we criticize. Obviously, we're not anti-U.S. government, but you can find all kinds of things. When I'll give you a couple examples. We had one columnist wrote a piece, and he wrote a piece which was, his premise was, is alcohol really forbidden in Islam? Is it really forbidden? Another one wrote a piece when the decision was made to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, asking, is Jerusalem really Islamic? You know, is that really, you know? So asking these types of questions. A lot of them have been people who criticize political Islam, criticize jihadism, but done it in a smart way, in an intelligent way. And some of the people who are writing there are people, actually some that you've had here, or that are well known in reformist circles, that write, I think, from as I said, a classically liberal perspective. We began that because it's easier, right? It's easier to do print media, and we began there. But we've wanted to continue doing that in other platforms, to do it in an online space, do it in a storytelling way, doing it on television, talking about living figures and talking about secularist reformers and liberals in the region in terms of public service announcements and opinion and news coverage. We're going to show a clip, for example, of what I mean. This is, before we show it, it's a series we did highlighting free thinkers in Arab history. So these are, we did a whole series. These we just picked a couple of them. Sheikh Abdul Razak is often called the father of Islamic secularism. That's the first one you saw. He was a cleric that promoted secularism in Egypt in the early part of the 20th century. And of course, Farag Foda is a martyr for kind of liberal interpretation of Islam, killed by jihadists in Egypt. So when these are your heroes, you're sending a message. These are the people we like. We like these people. You know, we identify with these people. And you do that, obviously, by, you know, the choice of what you choose to cover. I mean, I'll give you an example that we did with the news team. There's a hero of mine is a great Sudanese activist named, killed activist named Mahmoud Mohammed Taha. And I have, from my time in Sudan, I have connections with there. And a friend of mine who knows that I wrote, from memory, I wrote a piece on Mahmoud Mohammed Taha. And when it was the anniversary of Mahmoud Mohammed Taha's execution by the Sudanese government, by the Numeri government, he was a liberal Islamic scholar and activist. Activists in Sudan, including his family, we're going to do a session on the philosophy and thought of Mahmoud Mohammed Taha at Khartoum University. I directed our news team in Sudan. I want you to go cover that. And they went, and actually the government shut it down, and it was moved to the Taha family's home. And so the session took place there, and Al Huda news team went and covered the session in the home. Again, to identify ourselves with the cause of reform, with the cause of liberalism, that this is our cause. This is something that we care about. You know, everybody has an identity. If you look at Al Jazeera is, in many ways, has excellent journalists. Sometimes it has awful journalists. And sometimes it covers things well, sometimes it covers things badly. But if you watch Al Jazeera Arabic for any period of time, Al Jazeera has a subtext. Its subtext is Islamist, Muslim Brotherhood, Ikhwanji. Sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes it's less obvious. Sometimes it's right in your face, and sometimes it's more subtle. What I want is for us to be the station of these guys, the station of Mahmoud Mohammed Taha, the station of Farag Foda, and not dead people, but living people as well. Living reformers, living scholars. So when we do interviews, for example, with living scholars and activists and intellectuals, people like Dr. Turki Hamid of Saudi Arabia, or Syed al-Kimni, or Mohammed Shahrur, which we've done in the last few months, that's us identifying with a specific worldview. So Al Huda is the station of those people. That doesn't mean that, you know, the news is going to be the news, and the news we're going to cover broadly and we're going to cover fairly. But we are, just like when you pick up the Wall Street Journal or you pick up the Washington Post or the New York Times, you know that there's a worldview behind it. We have a worldview as well. That is the idea, and we will continue to hone that in everything that we do. We're also trying to do that in new programs that we're launching. I found a lot of the programs that we existed to be kind of rather dull. And so we've tried to kind of come up with new programs, and we have two of the first ones have launched. We have more coming. We're going to show a short clip of the first two shows that launched in March, and show the clip, and then I'll explain what you're seeing.
Samar Ammar, take 3.
3, 2, and roll.
في شركات أوروبية باستثمارات عجزت. محمد بن سلمان هل يحمل مشروع حقيقي للتغيير في السعودية التي لم تشهد تغييراً، أم هو مجرد شخص يريد الوصول إلى السلطة وإلى كرسي الحكم؟
بوتين لازم يفهم روسيا ما له الاتحاد السوفيتي، هو ما له ستالين، يعني مهما حاول هذا حجمه جديد من الإعراض.
في السياسة مفيش صداقات دايمة أو عداوات دايمة.
التقسيم حيطال البلد وسيطال بشار الأسد بمرحلة ما من المراحل.
أهلا بكم في حلقة جديدة من مختلف عليه. الدين الإسلامي في بؤرة الاتهام بإشاعة الرعب والإرهاب في العالم، هو أهم حاجة بالنسبة له القتل القتل القتل، ويظهر كالعادة في كل لحظة وفي كل منعطف وفي كل منحنى حراس العقيدة على طول عصف اتهام تكفير، ثم الأهم من ده كله بقى أنا اللي أملك الحقيقة، اليقين عندي أنا اللي عارف، أنتوا مش عارفين، أنا اللي مؤمن وأنتوا مش مؤمنين.
These are my shows. Sounds very vain, but these are shows that I ordered. The Sam and Ammar show was a concept that I had. Some of you that watch television a lot or are old like me, you may get these references. What I wanted was, you remember Siskel and Ebert, the movie show? What I said is I wanted, and there's a show on ESPN, if there are any sports fans here, called Pardon My Interruption. And so what I said is I want Siskel and Ebert / Pardon My Interruption, but about politics in the Arab world. And I knew of both Sam Tadros and Ammar Abdul Hamid, and I picked them. They're interesting. They're both kind of classically liberal intellectuals here based in the Washington area. They both have interesting backgrounds. Sam was kind of, as a young man, a traditional kind of Arab nationalist leftist. He was the type of guy that would go to Palestine rallies or anti-American Iraq rallies. Today he's a classical liberal. Ammar Abdul Hamid, originally from Syria, was an Islamist when he was a young man, and he's a secularist and a liberal as well. So the show is not about, again, on the one hand, isn't jihadism great? On the other hand, aren't dictators wonderful? No, they're bad. Dictators are bad. Jihadists are bad. Dictatorial regimes in the region are bad. This is a show which is completely biased. What I mean is has an edge. It's supposed to have an agenda. The other one, of course, Ibrahim Al-Isa is a very well-known figure in the Egyptian media, kind of perennial political gadfly, guy who's been fired and hired and arrested and unarrested and jailed for speaking his mind, for saying outrageous things. And so he's a guy that comes with a built-in audience. And his show is particularly about political Islam. It's a criticism of political Islam, and he does that on a weekly basis. Those are the first two shows that we launched. We have shows 3 and 4 coming up. We have show number 3 is a show from Beirut with the Lebanese intellectual, journalist, and activist Jumana Haddad. Some of you may be aware, and feminist Jumana Haddad, talking about the forbidden in the Arab world. Forbidden thoughts, forbidden books, forbidden media, forbidden pictures, all of that. To seek to break down the barriers that exist of red lines in the region. We should be a station where there are no red lines. The only red lines should be those of good taste and accuracy and all of that. And number 4, the 4th show that's coming, is another show basically on political religious themes, and it's the young, dynamic Egyptian intellectual Islam Buhairi will have a show on Al-Hurra coming up in a little bit as well. He's a guy that criticized Al-Azhar and was sent to prison in Egypt for a year because of his criticisms of Al-Azhar until he was pardoned by President Sisi. So that's the kind of the texture or the type of programming that we want to have. 4th, what we're doing, of course, is, as I said, we have this problem of you're not CNN News and you're not Nat Geo. What are you? We are radically changing the mix. We're going to be going basically from about 4 hours of news a day to about 10 hours of news a day, including for the first time doing news from the region. One of the complaints that I heard for many years from people in the region is, you guys always seem late. Why? Because the news was done in Springfield, Virginia. I remember when I was, when I started and I had the, I was acting vice president for news as well as president when I started, and we would hold the editorial meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning Springfield time. Well, that is 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the region. You're deciding what you're going to cover at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is a problem. You have to be on Middle East time. You can do it one of two ways. You can wake up and work at 3 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the morning, have everyone be night owls, sleep during the day and work at night, or you can produce news in the region. We're going to produce news in the region, and we're going to beef up our news operations from Washington, including news about the United States. We're going to have a newscast that's going to be rich and heavily focused on American news in the evening here, which means it'll be in the middle of the night there. Like, who's watching in the middle of the night? No one. But what it means is we will work the time change in our favor. The way it works now is, right, we are behind the region for the region. But actually, if we're covering the United States, we're ahead of the region. So there's no reason why we shouldn't get the American story, the stories originating from the United States, better and more accurate and more specific than our competition does, because we're working in this time. That's what we need to do, and that's what we're going to do. As I said, a lot of what we're going to do is expand content in the United States. We have already added a correspondent in California for the first time. We're trying to cover underreported positive and negative news about the United States. So it's not just, again, we're not a propaganda network. We cover reality. So, for example, we devoted an entire hour of programming in the fall to the opioid crisis in the United States and people telling stories of addiction and suffering and of lost children. When President Trump called for tariffs, for example, a while back, not the latest one, but a previous one, we dispatched a team, for example, to a dying steel mill in small town Pennsylvania to give a kind of very graphic example. Why do we care about this? Why is this important to us? So it's not just like, yay, America's wonderful. It's actually being realistic about what we're covering. In the digital space, I think the challenge is to be continually honing a voice that is distinctive. Again, there's a lot that is done in the social media space that is filler, which is done to get cheap views, man marries crocodile or something like that, which that was a story that appeared in the Daily Mail, and when that Al-Hura took and put online and translated. And as I told the staff, I said, the man was neither American nor Middle Eastern. There's he's some guy in Oaxaca, Mexico, So there was no reason, no kind of connection to either the United States or the region. It was just weird story that the Daily Mail would cover, and we're going to put that on because a lot of people are going to click on it. And what I told the staff is, we're not going to do that anymore. If you want to find man marries crocodile, it better be an Egyptian crocodile marrying an American man. Otherwise we don't want to see it. So the challenge for social media, I think, is to be distinctive, to be, this is a particular challenge, to be really in sync with the youth audience in the region, and we're far from where we need to be in that. We're barely on Instagram. We are not on Snapchat. We're going to be on Snapchat. We need to be on that. That's a huge platform for the Arabian Peninsula and the Gulf, for Saudi Arabia. WhatsApp, for example, is an app which is hugely important in the region. We have to find ways to work there as well. So that's what we're doing in the digital space. Right now, and I'm going to sum this up and then we can go to questions, is we're in a full court press to change everything. We are, when I took over, one person who is at BBG advised me that what I could do is I could shut everything down and start from scratch if I wanted to do that. I decided not to do that. I decided to kind of rebuild the plane while flying the plane. And of course, it is a hair-raising experience to do that. But we're now in the full court press. We are doing everything. We're destroying sets, rebuilding sets. We're getting rid of people. We're bringing on people. We're launching new shows. We're getting rid of old shows. We're expanding the news. We're moving the news. We're doing special things. All of it doing at the same time. So it's, that like that line from Ghostbusters, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Obviously, we have any Ghostbuster fans here. But so that's where we are. This is a stressful time at MBN, but I think it's also a very hopeful sign. A hopeful sign that in the end we will produce something which is distinctive, aggressive, and lively. I don't know whether the Arab masses will respond with what we'll produce. Will emerge later this year, full-born in September, October, November of this year. But at the very least, I think we'll be producing that is very different and distinctive from what we've had in the past. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
It's so exciting. It's so exciting to hear all this. So my question to you is this. I was with the French police today talking about French versus the American approaches to terrorism prevention.
Yeah.
We worked through the topics, and then at the end they came to the topic of counter-narrative.
Yes.
And they said, are you doing anything in the counter-narrative space? And I said, alas, we're not. And then I said, oh no, but we are. We've got Al-Hura. And so I hope now they'll look at it. But it brings to mind the question about what can we be doing in the domestic space. And you probably don't think about that too much, but it's such an interesting approach you've taken. Do you think there are lessons here for what we could be doing domestically? And by that I don't mean for the general American audience, but I mean particularly in the counter-radicalization space.
Well, we of course have nothing to do with the domestic space because our focus is, because by statute our focus is foreign audiences and by Sixth-Month Act and all of that stuff. Our target audience are not Americans. We don't broadcast to America. People can see our stuff online, but that's not our focus. But I think there are broader lessons you can learn. One is, for example, that you need to push back against these barriers or these kind of artificial categories that people come up. We're having people that are talking about religion on Al-Hura. I'm not talking about religion. Ibrahim Al-Isa is talking about religion. Islam Buhairi is talking about religion. Turki Al-Hamed so we're giving space to free thinkers, to liberals, to reformers, to people that have, kind of heterodox and open views. There's this kind of problem of kind of political correctness that exists both domestically and internationally, right? That, to reach audiences, you have to be a scary guy with a beard, like this guy. No. You know what I mean? Is people are unique, people are different, and we all too often think, and I remember this when I was in the State Department and I worked on this, is people often thought, I remember actually being this is during the Obama administration, the Obama White House, and some silly person standing up and saying, can't we get some key influencer at Al-Azhar to say how ISIS is evil and something like that. I said, regimes are by definition non-credible. The clerics of regimes are not credible. You have to kind of mix it up. Yeah, maybe you do need a kind of young, dynamic cleric from the slums of Cairo or Algiers who's going to say stuff that is edgy, and maybe they don't like the United States that much, but they're going to say stuff which is useful for you in your counterterrorism fight. So I guess what I mean is you have to be kind of break these preconceived notions that we often have that, holding an iftar shows we respect Islam. Well, yes, but I wrote a piece for Memory. I said, all too often we treat Muslims I was talking about governments, right? As if they're children, as if, here's a cookie, there,
That's not true.
Well, it's that, or pets or children. We have to engage with people seriously. We have to talk to them seriously. And government especially has a real problem in that, straitjacket of how do I engage with people and how do I talk to people and what do I say and, Islam is peace, no, Islam is evil. All this kind of, we kind of tie ourselves in knots. So I think that we have to respect our audience and we have to embrace the true diversity that exists in the Muslim world that often is not allowed to speak, that is often suppressed, whether it be in the domestic space or the international space. There are people saying some really good things in the region, and often they've been silenced, often they've been cowed into silence, often they've been put straitjackets, and we need to kind of mix things up. There are really good NGOs in the United States and organizations. I'm meeting with one. There's a great young Iraqi American guy, Faisal Al-Mattar, who has a great organization called Ideas Beyond Borders that is doing fascinating work, translating works about kind of human rights and secularism and free inquiry from English into Arabic, and is doing stuff in social media. And that's the type of stuff that we need to see more of in the region. That's my space. It's not the domestic space, but that would be my answer. So.
Well, actually, I have the microphone, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't heard what I came here to say before. What's your experience of dealing with BBG? To my experience, that BBG, and especially BBG leadership, is a joke at best. And that's a culture to drag people down in BBG. Well, I'll give you one example. I took over the BBG China, VOA Chinese in 2011. 3 years later, we got the number, the audience number from, say, less than 2 million to 24.3 million. Right after that, BBG, or the leadership, came to destroy us. And the service is now almost destroyed. So what's your experience and how do you deal with that?
Well, look, I'm new at this game. All I can say is that I've been very forthright, crystal clear with BBG about what I want to do from day one. Everything that I described to you here, I told BBG, I didn't ask them for permission. I told them, this is what I am going to do. And they haven't stood in my way. They've been supportive, and they, haven't gotten in my business, which people who know me in the government know that I, don't like. So far, I think it's been great. I have no complaints about BBG.
Give them time, they will struggle.
Yeah. So I think we had one back there. Go ahead. Yeah.
I see that you have a clear view to what you're going to do on TV.
Yes.
But as we know that millennials, young people, are consuming almost 100% of their media on their phones, on social media.
Yeah.
And big TV networks like from CNN to Al Jazeera understood that. And they have also understood they are late to start. And they start working with social media influencers. CNN working with Casey Neistat, some guy on YouTube.
Uh-huh.
Al Jazeera is working with an Egyptian guy. What are you doing to reach millennials? Well, they're not going to watch TV, even if you're going to go from 4 hours in news to 10 hours, they're watching social media.
Well, I think what you need to do there, I think you're right, is your content has to be scalable. It has to be content. It cannot be, for example, yes, if you have 10 hours of news, nobody's going to watch 10 hours of news. But what you have to have is content that is suitable for news or for the phone. And that is interesting enough that people will want to watch it in social media as well. And that's compelling enough and unique enough. That goes into the question of influencers. The future of media, in my view, as I'm not a journalist, but I'm a person who's been around media my entire adult life and worked in it in terms of being a public diplomacy officer in state. The way I see it, and we all see the fragmented nature of media in the United States, right, is it's evolved into something which is indigestible, swallowable pieces. So you have to have these chunks, these elements, these pieces that you can use. And yes, you need to be distinctive. You have to be premium. That where it goes into personalities. If you're just a boring guy regurgitating talking points, that's not going to work. People want distinctiveness. People want authenticity. In my work, with my research and my work on ISIS, for example, one of the big successes, one of the big reasons that ISIS was successful in its video, people think it was because they're like lopping off heads and spilling blood. No! What it was is that they projected deep, sincere authenticity. You had some young guy saying, I used to live in Montreal, I had a really good salary, I was a bum, I was lost, I gave it all up, I saw the light. Let me tell you guys, this place is terrific. The Islamic State is wonderful. You guys need to come here right now. A kind of first-person testimony, The authenticity of that person, to go back to your question, was not that they had a degree or they were an old guy with a long beard. It was a young person talking on social media in their own voice and their own distinctiveness that is attractive to people. So that's what you need. I mean, you need chunks that are acceptable. You need stuff that you can have there. But again, it has to be driven with elements that make it unique and special. Premium content. Stuff that you got that nobody else has. Stuff that is quirky, stuff that is different, stuff that has its own voice and its own flavor. To me, that is the way you reach those types of audiences.
When you create shows with those social media influencers like everybody else is doing, because these shows like you're creating the show with Sam and Amar.
Yeah.
But they came from TV, it's produced for TV. You could create the same shows with people who
But actually, that's not true. With Sam and Amar, we have a very strong social media element. It was the first show that we did, I think the first show that we ever did, where we built in from the beginning a strong social media element. And it's the first one. I think we can do better. Sam and Amar was like the pioneer of this type of thing that we want to do. I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying that we're working on that. So, yes. Oh, okay, go. You have the microphone, okay. He that has the microphone asks the question, yes.
My name is Hussein Nan. I work for VOA Management Service.
Uh-huh.
And I'm one of the Management 5.
Uh-huh.
In connection to the woman we interviewed tobacco last year. And Sasha is another one of the 5.
Uh-huh.
I was watching the BBC board meeting this afternoon. And I was watching you. And I congratulate you on the good job you have been doing on reporting the elections in the Middle Eastern countries. And I congratulate you on the fine job you have been doing at MBN. I'm not flattering you. I do feel it. My question is, on June the 4th, the White House announced the nomination of Michael Pack to be the next CEO of BBG.
Yeah.
And talking about the BBG board meeting this afternoon,
Yeah.
I was hoping to hear John Lansing to announce his intent to resign as the CEO of the BBG. It didn't happen. So my question to you now is, when or how soon do you expect that to happen? How soon the nomination of Mr. Michael Pack will go through, and how soon Amanda Bennett will follow suit? What's the normal practice?
Look, none of those questions are questions for me. Those are questions either for BBG or for the U.S. Senate. They have nothing to do with me. So.
Mr. Ambassador, you also played a very important role State Department in strategic counter-messaging.
Mhm.
What was your greatest challenge there? Was it different from what you're facing now? And what was your greatest success that you can point to?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what success I had. Look, the greatest challenge was this was an operation that was set up with a kind of an ambitious agenda, which was kind of strangled at birth by the bureaucratic process. You basically had an organization, CSCC, that had a White House executive order creating it, but we couldn't force anyone to do anything. We couldn't force other parts of government that produce stuff, that produce media, that had content. We couldn't say, look guys, don't say this, say that, or let's do this event, that. We didn't have the power in government. When you're in government, the greatest power you can have is the power to convoke, the power to order. And CSCC had the power to, I forget what it was, orient and inform. Orient, point someone east, right? What is, I am telling you to do this, fine, yes. Then they would ignore what we said and they would do whatever they wanted. So that was my greatest frustration. It was an entity which was supposed to coordinate the US government's counterterrorism messaging response, but we actually couldn't because, you didn't have that power. Yes, you could try to use suasion, right? Try to convince, try to cajole, to encourage. And we did that, and sometimes we succeeded. But I once described CSCC, my old office, I said it was part Ferrari and part donkey cart. What I meant is the things that we could do by ourselves, we could do rapidly. The things that we had to do with another part of the government, say NSC or a bureau in the State Department or an embassy or DOD or CIA, depended on the willingness of that entity to work with us. Sometimes their willingness was there and sometimes the willingness was not. The Ferrari part was, for example, the work that I did there, we became notorious for our videos, which was only a small part of what we did. The reason we became notorious about that was something we could do. We didn't have to ask anyone's permission. And even that backfired because we finally produced a video in English which got millions of views, and it was in English, and it really upset some people, and was mocked on The Daily Show or something like that. And that was really bad. So even a success became what we had a viral video. That was a bad thing. So it was, I'm just glad that phase of my life is over and that others are running that shop now. And it has different responsibilities now, so.
If I may, Alberto, some years ago I was speaking with one of the most senior distinguished journalists from Jordan.
Uh-huh.
And I said, what do you think of Radio Sawa? And he said, it's fun, but it's irrelevant. Most of your remarks this evening have been on Al-Hura. Can you tell us about what's going on with Sawa?
Well, that's a complicated question. I won't describe much. I think you want this. I won't describe much about. It's complicated because it's tied up with funding and the decision-making process in OMB and in the government. But I can't tell you the problem with Sawa, because the problem with Sawa is very obvious. Sawa was in its day pioneering. It was revolutionary when it launched. It had a mixture of Arabic and American music and a little bit of news, and that was like a breath of fresh air in 2002. And they never changed the format. They never evolved. So they created, it's like empty calories. You had a product which had an audience, but it was irrelevant because it was based on a mistake. The mistake was thinking, we're going to be having factual news Because Al Jazeera, for example, are liars, right? The Al Jazeera is putting out fake news or false information. But actually, Al Jazeera is not putting out fake news or false information. They're putting out their take of real information. So for us to have like headlines, right? You have a lot of music, and then at 15 and 45 on the hour, you have headlines. Well, you know, everybody has that in the Arab world. So you developed a success. Sawa was a success, which was in a way irrelevant because it lacked the kind of context of what does it, you know, these headlines, what does that mean? You need to put that in some kind of context. You need to talk about, you know, kind of the context and the worldview around it. And it never evolved from 2002. They rested on their laurels and they had good numbers. They still have good numbers, but as I said, it's kind of like empty calories. You have an audience that listens, but it has, I think the impact was not the impact that it could have had. I still think that Sawa can be reinvented and can be made more relevant. I don't know whether I'll have that chance or not, but we'll see. You have a question?
One more.
Yeah, Ambassador Fernandez, I congratulate you on the improvement in Al-Hurra. As an Iraqi, Arab-speaking, I watch specifically the video clips, the high-quality video clips that you are producing, like the one for Pompeo with the 12 points against Iran. It's spreading like fire in Iraq. And talking about social media, this is the best social media tool.
Yeah.
Also some out of the norm articles, that the one about Jerusalem or Quds, is it Islamic? There's a huge appetite in the Arab world now for out of the norm ideas, like say the Qumni and others that you mentioned. But one of the most important aspects of Al-Hurra when it was incepted, I was here in Washington working with our friend Bob, was Al-Hurra Iraq. And I didn't hear from you much about Al-Hurra Iraq, which I think is a very important pillar in Al-Hurra success. Specifically, Iraq is the only country which has an Iranian hegemony and ISIS, and you have to work yourself in between these two. That's my first question.
Yeah.
My second question is an idea and a question. Have you thought of having an hour in Kurdish, for example, and an hour for Christians, minorities in the Middle East, like in Aramaic, for example, Assyrian, Chaldean?
Yeah. On Al-Hurra Iraq, yes, we have plans to make a lot of changes there. Al-Hurra Iraq is a success story. Al-Hurra Iraq is one of the top foreign stations in Iraq. Iraq is the place where we're not irrelevant in Iraq. To this day, Al-Hurra Iraq has a large audience in Iraq for a variety of historical reasons. But, kind of like the Sawa thing, we've kind of rested on our laurels. We kind of haven't really invested. We have a very good program share through the years, and we've kind of allowed it to slowly deteriorate. We still have very good numbers in Iraq, but you have to be constantly doing all the things that we talked about, you know, being more edgy, more aggressive, more visually appealing, all of those things that we have to do. So Al-Hurra Iraq is a success, but it's a success which needs TLC and hasn't gotten the TLC I think that it deserves. We're going to give it that TLC. On Kurdish and Aramaic, I would love to have, you know, the Suryani hour or something like that, but our focus is Arabic. What we do try to do is, kind of connected with that, is I do think that covering the voices, just what as I mentioned, the voices of liberals, free thinkers, secularists in the Muslim world. We need to also cover voices of communities which are often underrepresented, whether it be women, whether it be religious minorities, whether it be all kinds of things. So, you know, and actually that's part of the BBG mandate, that we should be, in addition to presenting the voice of the United States, the United States government and America, American society and culture as a whole, we're also called to actually give voice to the voiceless in the region. And to me, voice to the voiceless in the region means minorities, it means the oppressed, it means the marginalized, means youth voices, it means people that are not marching with, al-khat al-sultawi, the line of the state and of the authority. We need to be aggressive in doing that. Doesn't mean we're not anti-Egypt government, we're not anti-Jordan government, we're not we are some governments. We're anti-Iran, we're anti-Hezbollah, we're anti-Hamas, we're anti-Ikhwan, we're anti-jihadism, we're anti all those. But the states which the United States has relations with, we're not anti them. But if somebody who is marginalized and is thrown in prison in some country in the region, we should speak up for them. We should be bold about it. We should be aggressive about it. That we should give those voices an opportunity to speak. We should give voices who are, native speakers of Kurdish or native speakers of Suryani also the voices to speak. And I think we're doing that pretty well, actually. Thank you all very much.